So the Democrats and their speaker have this vote tomorrow on how to proceed, basically. Politico reports the Dems are confident they will achieve, quote, near unity on the resolution, and top Democrats are expecting few defections. The Times is reporting House Speaker Nancy Pelosi struck a sober tone in a closed-door meeting with her Democratic caucus today. They report nobody came here to impeach a president, and no decision has been made to impeach the president, Pelosi told members, according to an aide in the room. But she added a decision had been made to open the impeachment inquiry, and now we are putting forth the terms as to how we go forth in the fairest possible way. Republicans are continuing to argue that the president is not being afforded proper due process. Here is Majority Leader Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor earlier today.
No due process now, maybe some later, but only if we feel like it, is not a standard that should ever be applied to any American, and it should not be applied here to the President of the United States.
With us to talk about it is a veteran of the House, Donna Edwards, former Democratic member of Congress from the great state of Maryland, who is these days a Washington Post columnist. Congresswoman, thank you very much for coming on. We needed someone fresh from the game. Let's do this as a lightning round. First of all, what's the problem with what McConnell just said about being denied due process?
Well, the problem is that Mitch McConnell hasn't actually read the resolution, which really affords the president an opportunity in the hearings to call witnesses, to examine witnesses, to present evidence. And apart from that, this is like a grand jury. It's part of the investigation. When it gets over to the Senate, Mitch McConnell can provide the president all the due process that he needs in the context of what looks like a trial, but it's not a criminal proceeding. And, Republicans all along have also had an opportunity to examine witnesses in these closed door investigative depositions, and they haven't really participated. And so now the Speaker has set forth a set of rules that the House is going to pass, and that will outline the procedure, which I think is a really thorough procedure that allows full participation.
Earlier tonight, I was calling this vote procedural. Do you think there's any more risk to it than that?
No, I don't. I think it was an important part of the process. I mean, the House got and Democrats got an affirmative ruling in the courts last week. They had already opened an impeachment inquiry, and now this sets about the process by which those public hearings will be conducted.
Can you name one member of Congress with an R after their name who you're going to be curious to see if they cross over and vote for this?
Well, we do have the obvious ones who supported the impeachment inquiry, but I don't know. In some ways, they may treat tomorrow's vote like a regular procedural vote and stick to party lines, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, the House is a majority institution, and this process is going to go forward, and Republicans can decide if they want to clown around like they have in the past, or if they want to treat this like the serious constitutional matter that it is.
We've been trying to warn our viewers of a possible iceberg ahead, and I'm curious to hear how much you actually fear an attempted government shutdown as we go forward in these next few weeks.
Well, it would be very unfortunate. And, what we do know is that government shutdowns do not work in favor of those who are pushing forward for a shutdown. It's not a good political move, apart from the fact that it's right before the holidays, and not a great move for the American people. And I don't think the public is going to be distracted or confused by the president pushing forward with a shutdown because he wants to avoid the constitutional process of impeachment.
Do you think by Christmas we'll be looking at articles of impeachment?
I think we could, but I think, as the Speaker has said, this is it is a process, and they're going to go where the facts take them. But I think it is likely that we're going to end up before then. But in time for the Senate to start the new year and begin the process of trying the president, should it come to that. And, the Speaker said that she's not confident. She doesn't know yet where this is going to lead. I mean, when you look at the evidence that's been laid out, even in the public thus far, I mean, it seems very unlikely that there would not be articles of impeachment. And I would expect that that process is going to be done. And I would expect that the witnesses who are called and what they've laid out in terms of allowing staff counsel to ask questions, allowing Chairman Schiff to really present a full narrative without interruption of the evidence. I think these are really important mechanisms to tell the story to the American people and to convey the absolute urgency of doing this in the face of a president who, this isn't, like we're talking about the 2016 election. We're talking about interference in the 2020 election. There could not be anything more urgent than to hold the president accountable for his behavior.
Important point to end on. Our guest tonight, Donna Edwards, puts a D after her name. Congresswoman, thank you very much, as always, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.